On the morning of September 14, 1996, Walter Drummond kissed his wife Dorothy goodbye, climbed onto his Farmall tractor, and drove toward the back 40 to check the irrigation pond. By sunset, Dorothy was calling neighbors. By midnight, the sheriff's department was searching the property with flashlights and dogs. They found nothing. No tractor tracks, no disturbed earth, no sign Walter Drummond had been there at all. The case file listed him as a voluntary missing person. Heartland County moved on. But 15 years later, after the worst drought in 6 decades drained the old irrigation pond to cracked mud, the earth opened up. Carl Drummond's daughter Emma was walking the dried lakebed when the ground gave way beneath her boots, and she found herself staring down into a sinkhole at rusted red metal 20 feet below. What the family pulled from that hole would prove Walt hadn't wandered off to start over somewhere else, hadn't abandoned the farm he'd worked for 40 years. He'd been silenced, and the people responsible had been attending his memorial service, sitting in Dorothy's kitchen, looking his sons in the eye for 15 years. Emma Drummond's boots cracked through the dried mud like it was old plaster. The irrigation pond had been nothing but dust and spiderweb cracks for 3 weeks now. The worst drought since the Dust Bowl years, the old-timers said. She'd walked this property her whole life, knew every fence line and gully, but she'd never seen the pond like this, never seen the bottom. The earth felt wrong underfoot, too hollow, like walking on a frozen lake you didn't quite trust. She was supposed to be checking the stock tank on the north pasture, making sure the cattle still had water. Instead, she'd detoured here, drawn by morbid curiosity. Wanted to see what 22 years of farm trash looked like when the water finally gave it up. Tires, probably. Fence wire, maybe some tools her dad had dropped over the years. The sun hammered down on her shoulders. Sweat trickled down her spine. July in Kansas felt like standing inside an oven. That's when she saw it. At first she thought it was a piece of rusted equipment, half buried in the dried silt. Old disc harrow, maybe. But the color was wrong, that particular shade of International Harvester red that her dad got sentimental about. The color Grandpa Walt's tractor had been. Emma moved closer. Her heart was doing something strange in her chest. Not a disc harrow, the front wheel of a tractor, the distinctive white rim. The same model her dad had taught her to drive on when she was 12, except that tractor was parked in the machine shed right now. She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking, dropped it once before she got it to her ear. "Dad?" Her voice came out strange. "You need to come to the old irrigation pond." "Emma, I'm in the middle of—" "Now, Dad." Right now. Something in her tone must have cut through. Silence on the other end. Then, "What's wrong?" She looked down into the depression. The front wheel was just the beginning. As her eyes adjusted to the shadows, she could make out more. The hood, the steering wheel, the whole damn tractor, sitting there like it had been waiting 15 years for someone to notice. "I found Grandpa's Farmall." The silence stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. "Emma." Her father's voice had gone flat, that voice he used when he was working very hard not to feel something. "Stay there. Don't go near it. I'm coming." Don't go near. Carl Drummond made the drive from the farmhouse in 4 minutes. Should have taken 7. Emma heard the truck before she saw it, engine screaming like he'd kept the pedal to the floor the whole way. Dust plume rising behind him. He didn't even turn the engine off before he was out of the cab and walking toward her. She'd never seen her father's face look like that. Pale under the sunburn. Eyes too wide. "Where?" she pointed. Carl stopped at the edge of the dried pond bed. Stood there for a long moment, just looking. His hands hung at his sides. Emma noticed they were shaking. "Jesus Christ." Barely a whisper. "Is it?" "Yeah." He ran a hand over his face. "That's Dad's tractor." Emma had heard the story her whole life, bits and pieces anyway. Her grandfather had vanished when she was 7 years old, just drove off one morning and never came back. Some people said he'd started over somewhere else. Some said he'd had an accident out in the fields, fell into an old well or something. The sheriff's department had searched for weeks, found nothing. Nobody had ever mentioned the irrigation pond. "How did it get down there?" Emma asked. Carl didn't answer. He was moving now, sliding down the slope into the dried bed. The earth crumbled under his boots. Emma followed, even though something in her gut said she shouldn't. Said she didn't want to see what 22 years underwater had done to that tractor. Up close, it was worse. The red paint had blistered and peeled. Rust ate through the wheel wells. The seat was just springs and rotted fabric. But it was unmistakably Walt's Farmall. Emma had seen enough photos to recognize the white front grille, the particular dent in the left fender. Carl circled it slowly, not touching, just looking. His jaw was clenched so tight Emma could see the muscle jumping. "Dad?" She kept her voice soft. "Should we call someone?" "Yeah." He pulled out his phone, stared at it like he'd forgotten how it worked. "Yeah, we should." That's when Emma saw it. Behind the tractor, half buried in dried silt, a shape that didn't belong. She moved closer before her brain could tell her not to. Knelt down, brushed away a layer of cracked mud. Bone. Human. Unmistakably human. The curve of a skull, brown with age and silt. The world tilted. Emma's vision narrowed to a tunnel. She heard herself make a sound. Not quite a scream, more like all the air leaving her lungs at once. Carl was beside her in 2 steps. Saw what she was seeing, went absolutely still. "Oh, God," his voice broke. "Oh, God, Dad." The sheriff's department arrived 30 minutes later, then the county coroner, then the state police. By late afternoon, the Drummond property was swarming with people, investigators, forensic techs, officers cordoning off the area with yellow tape that snapped in the hot wind. Emma sat in the back of her dad's truck, watching, trying not to throw up, trying not to think about the skull, that hollow eye socket, staring up at nothing. Her father stood with Sheriff Morrison, a man their family had known for 20 years. They were too far away for Emma to hear the conversation, but she could see her dad's body language, the way he kept looking back at the pond, the way his hands wouldn't stop moving. Uncle Pete arrived around 5, his truck kicking up dust. He climbed out and went straight to Carl. The brothers stood together, not speaking, just watching the techs work. Pete's face had gone gray. By the time they lifted the tractor out with a crane, had to bring one in from 3 counties over, the sun was setting. The Farmall swung on heavy chains, water and mud streaming from its rusted frame. Cameras flashed. The techs moved in immediately, documenting everything before they touched the remains. Emma couldn't watch. She turned away, stared out at the brown fields instead. Everything looked dead. The drought had killed the grass, killed the crops. Even the trees looked like they were barely hanging on. Her grandmother. Someone needed to tell Grandma Dot. Emma looked at her father. He was still standing with Pete, both of them frozen, watching the crane lower the tractor onto a flatbed truck. Neither of them had moved to make the call. Emma pulled out her phone. Her hands were steadier now. Shock wearing off, maybe, or just the numb certainty of what had to happen next. The phone rang 4 times before Dorothy Drummond answered. "Emma, honey?" "Grandma," Emma's voice cracked. "I need you to sit down." Dorothy Drummond arrived at dusk. Carl tried to stop her at the property line. They weren't letting family pass the tape, but she pushed past him like he wasn't there. 70 years old, and she moved like a woman half her age when she was angry. "Ma, you can't—" "That's my husband down there." Her voice cut like sheet metal. "I've waited 15 years. I'm not waiting in a goddamn truck." Sheriff Morrison stepped in. "Mrs. Drummond, I understand, but this is an active—" "I don't care what it is." She turned those sharp blue eyes on him. "Walter is my husband. I have a right to see him." They stared at each other. Then Morrison nodded once. 5 minutes, and you don't touch anything." Dorothy walked down into the dried pond like she was walking into church. Slow, deliberate. Emma watched from above. Her grandmother stopped at the edge of the excavation site. The forensic team had cordoned off the skeleton with stakes and string. Floodlights made everything look stark and unreal. Dorothy stood there for a long time, not crying, just looking. Emma couldn't see her face, but she could see the way her grandmother's shoulders were shaking. Finally, Dorothy spoke, her voice carried in the still evening air. "Hello, Walter." They didn't finish the excavation until well after dark. The forensic team worked under portable lights, their shadows long and distorted. Emma stayed the whole time. So did Carl and Pete. So did Dorothy, despite everyone telling her to go home. The Drummond family stood together at the tape line and watched them uncover what was left of Walt Drummond. The coroner, Dr. Rashad Chen, a woman Emma vaguely knew from town, worked carefully, documenting every bone, every scrap of cloth, every piece of evidence. At one point she stopped, held something up to the light. Called over one of the investigators. Emma saw it even from 40 feet away. A watch, the metal band corroded, but still intact. Still wrapped around the bones of a wrist. "That's his." Dorothy's voice was steady, flat, Timex. "I gave it to him for our 25th anniversary. He never took it off." Sheriff Morrison wrote that down. "Mrs. Drummond, I know this is difficult, but—" "It's not difficult," Dorothy cut him off. "Difficult was not knowing. Difficult was wondering if he left me. Difficult was watching my sons think their father abandoned them." She looked at Morrison. Her eyes were dry. "This? This is just the truth, finally. They didn't leave until nearly midnight. The forensic team loaded everything into vans, the remains, the tractor, bags of soil samples. Promised they'd have preliminary results within 48 hours. The official investigation was open again. After 15 years, Walter Drummond was no longer a missing person. He was a homicide. Emma drove her grandmother home. Carl and Pete followed in Carl's truck. Nobody spoke. The headlights cut through darkness so complete it felt like the world had ended at the property line. When they pulled into Grandma Dot's driveway, the house looked smaller than Emma remembered. The porch light was on. Moths battered themselves against it, desperate and stupid. Dorothy sat in the passenger seat, not moving, her hands folded in her lap. Perfect posture, even now. "Grandma?" Emma kept her voice soft. "I knew." Dorothy didn't look at her, just stared straight ahead at the house. "Not what happened, but I knew he didn't leave. Walter would never leave." Her voice finally cracked. "Everyone thought I was in denial. Even my own sons thought I couldn't accept the truth, but I knew my husband. I knew." Emma didn't know what to say, reached over and took her grandmother's hand. The skin was paper thin, bones fragile underneath. "You were right," Emma whispered. Dorothy squeezed her hand once, then let go, opened the door. "I'm going to bed. Tell your father and your uncle to go home. We'll talk in the morning." She walked into the house without looking back. The door closed behind her. A moment later, the porch light went out. Emma sat in the dark truck and cried. The coroner's office called 3 days later. Emma was in the machine shed, trying to replace a hydraulic hose on the baler, when her father's phone rang. She heard it through the open door, that particular ringtone he used for important calls. Watched him pull it from his pocket, look at the screen, go very still. "This is Carl Drummond." Emma set down her wrench, wiped her hands on her jeans, walked to the doorway but didn't cross it, gave him space but stayed close enough to hear. Her father's face didn't change as he listened, just that same careful blankness he'd worn since they found the tractor. But his knuckles went white around the phone. "I understand," he said finally. "Yes, tomorrow at 10. I'll bring my mother." A pause. "My brother, too. Thank you, Dr. Chen." He lowered the phone, stood there in the driveway, staring at nothing. "Dad?" "They want us to come in." His voice was flat. "They've got preliminary findings." Emma's stomach tightened. "And?" Carl looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 3 days. His eyes were red-rimmed. She didn't think he'd been sleeping. She wouldn't say over the phone. "But Emma—" He stopped, started again. "She said we should bring Uncle Pete. Said we'd want family there. That meant it was bad." Emma knew that much about small-town courtesy. When officials told you to bring family, they were preparing you for something that would knock you sideways. "I'll call Grandma," Emma said. The Barton County Coroner's office occupied a squat brick building behind the courthouse. Emma had driven past it 1,000 times, never thought twice about it. Now it looked different, heavier, like the building itself was holding secrets it didn't want to give up. They arrived at 9:45. All of them, Carl, Pete, Dorothy, and Emma. Dorothy wore her church dress, navy blue with pearl buttons. She'd put on lipstick. Emma didn't know why that detail hurt, but it did. The waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Beige walls, plastic chairs, a receptionist who looked up with professional sympathy when they walked in. "The Drummond family?" "Yes," Dorothy's voice was steady. "Dr. Chen is ready for you. Conference room B, down the hall." The hallway was longer than it should have been. Emma's boots squeaked on the linoleum. Pete walked with his hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders hunched. Carl held the door for his mother. Dr. Chen was waiting inside. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much death. She stood when they entered. "Mrs. Drummond." "Mr. Drummond, Mr. Drummond." She nodded to each of them. "And you must be Emma." "Please sit." The conference table was fake wood laminate. Files were stacked in front of Dr. Chen. A laptop sat closed beside them. On the wall behind her, anatomical charts showed skeletal systems in precise detail. Emma's mouth had gone dry. "First," Dr. Chen said, "I want to say I'm very sorry for your loss. I know this has been—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "A difficult situation. Just tell us what you found." Dorothy's hands were folded on the table, perfectly still. Dr. Chen nodded, opened the top file. "The remains are definitely those of Walter Drummond. We were able to confirm identity through dental records. The skeleton is complete, well preserved due to the water and silt. Male, approximately late 50s, consistent with Mr. Drummond's age at time of disappearance." "How did he die?" Carl's voice was hoarse. Dr. Chen met his eyes. "Blunt force trauma to the skull, significant damage to the occipital bone. That's the back of the head. The fracture pattern suggests a single, powerful blow." The room went very quiet. Emma could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. "Someone hit him," Pete said. "Yes." Dr. Chen pulled out a photograph, set it on the table, angled so they could see. "This is the fracture." The injury would have been immediately fatal or rendered him unconscious. Given the location and angle, it's consistent with being struck from behind. Emma stared at the photo, tried to make sense of it. Just bone and measurements. Clinical, impersonal, nothing like her grandfather. "He didn't see it coming." Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. "Unlikely, no." Carl leaned forward. His jaw was clenched so tight, Emma heard his teeth grind. "What about the tractor? Was their damage consistent with an accident?" "That's the second thing." Dr. Chen pulled out more photos. "The tractor shows significant damage to the front left side, the same side we found the body on. But the damage pattern isn't consistent with a rollover or collision. It's consistent with being pushed." "Pushed?" Pete sat back in his chair. "You're saying someone—" "I'm saying the tractor was operational when it entered the water. The gears were engaged. The steering mechanism was intact. Someone drove it to that location, and based on the final position and the soil displacement patterns, someone pushed it in." Silence. Emma felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "With my father on it," Carl said. "The body was found beneath the front left wheel," Dr. Chen confirmed, "positioned in a way that suggests Mr. Drummond was already on the ground when the tractor was pushed in on top of him." Emma's stomach lurched. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Dorothy stood up, walked to the window, stood there with her back to all of them, looking out at the parking lot. "Mrs. Drummond," Dr. Chen's voice was gentle. "I'm fine." Dorothy didn't turn around. "Continue." Dr. Chen glanced at Carl. He nodded once. She pulled out another file. "We found several items with the remains." His wallet was in his back pocket, empty but the leather preserved enough that we could still see the outline of cards and cash. His wedding ring was intact. And this. She set a plastic evidence bag on the table. The watch. Emma recognized it immediately. The Timex her grandmother had mentioned. The metal band was crusted with rust and sediment, but the face was still visible. The hands frozen at 11:47. Dorothy turned from the window, stared at the watch. "That's the one," she whispered. "There's something else." Dr. Chen opened the evidence bag carefully, turned the watch over. There's an inscription on the back. It says, "To Walt. All my love. Dot. 1981. Dorothy made a sound, not quite a sob, more like the air had been punched out of her lungs. Carl was on his feet immediately, arm around his mother's shoulders. "I'm okay." Dorothy pushed him away gently. "I'm okay. I just—" She looked at Dr. Chen. "Can I have it? When you're done with it?" "Yes, ma'am. Once the investigation is complete, all personal effects will be returned to the family." Pete cleared his throat. "You said there was something else." "Yes." Dr. Chen pulled out a final evidence bag. This one held something wrapped in what looked like deteriorated plastic. "We found this in the tractor cab, wedged under the seat. It appears to be a document of some kind. The plastic kept it partially protected, but it's extremely fragile. We're working with a document specialist to see if we can salvage any information." Emma leaned forward. "What kind of document?" "We're not sure yet. But it appears to be folded papers, possibly multiple sheets, and there are handwritten notes visible on at least one page." Dr. Chen looked at each of them. "Mr. Drummond went to considerable effort to hide this. Waterproof bag, deliberately concealed. Whatever this is, he didn't want anyone finding it unless they found him." "Can we see it?" Carl asked. "Not yet. The paper is too fragile. We need to dry it properly, stabilize it. That could take weeks, but—" She pulled up a file on her laptop, turned it so they could see. "We did manage to photograph the visible text before we moved it. The image was blurry, warped by water damage and age. But Emma could make out handwriting, her grandfather's handwriting. She'd seen it in old birthday cards her father kept. 3 words were legible at the top of the page: soil test results, and below that, circled heavily in pen: contaminated, illegal dumping." The room went absolutely still. "Oh, Jesus," Pete breathed. Carl was staring at the screen. "Dad found something." "It appears so, yes." Dr. Chen closed the laptop. "Sheriff Morrison has been briefed on all of this. He'll be reaching out to discuss next steps. But based on the evidence, the skull fracture, the positioning of the body, the deliberate concealment of the tractor, and now these documents, this is being treated as a homicide investigation. Someone killed him to keep him quiet." Dorothy had returned to the table. She sat down heavily, suddenly looking every bit her 70 years. "Walter found something, and someone killed him for it. We believe that's a strong possibility, yes?" Emma watched her father, watched the way his hands had started shaking, the way he couldn't seem to look away from the laptop. "Dad?" she said quietly. He didn't answer, just sat there, staring at nothing. Finally, Pete spoke. "What happens now?" "Sheriff Morrison will be conducting interviews," Dr. Chen said. "Anyone who knew Mr. Drummond, anyone who worked with him, anyone who might have information about what he was investigating. The state police are also involved now, given the potential environmental crime aspect." She paused. "I know this is overwhelming, but after 15 years, we finally have real evidence. We can find out what happened to your father." "We know what happened." Carl's voice was rough. "Someone murdered him. Then they sat at our kitchen table and told us how sorry they were that he'd left. They came to the memorial service. They—" His voice broke. "They looked us in the eye and lied." Dorothy reached over, put her hand over Carl's, squeezed once. "Then we find them," she said quietly. "However long it takes. We find them." They left the coroner's office at 11:30. The sun was brutal overhead, heat shimmering off the asphalt. Emma felt like she'd been underground for hours. The light was too bright, the air too hot. Her father stood in the parking lot, keys in his hand, not moving. "Carl?" Pete touched his brother's shoulder. "You okay to drive?" "Yeah." Carl blinked. "Yeah, I'm fine." He wasn't fine. Emma could see that. None of them were fine. Grandma Dot had already gotten into Carl's truck, sitting in the passenger seat with perfect posture. Waiting, always waiting. Emma pulled out her phone, 3 missed calls from the county extension office where she worked part-time. She'd taken the morning off, but apparently there was some crisis with the drought relief applications. None of it seemed to matter anymore. "Emma," her father was looking at her, "you should go home. Get some rest." "I'm fine, Dad." "You're not." He said it gently. "None of us are." "But you—" He stopped, started again. "You're the one who found him." That's not easy." Emma thought about the skull staring up from the dried mud, thought about her grandfather's watch, frozen at 11:47, thought about soil test results and the word contaminated circled in desperate pen. "I want to help," she said, "with whatever comes next. I want to help find who did this." Carl looked like he wanted to argue. Then he just nodded, tired, defeated. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Sheriff Morrison called that evening while Emma was feeding the horses. She saw her father's truck pull up to the barn, watched him climb out, and walk toward her with his phone in his hand. "Morrison wants to talk to us. Tomorrow morning. All of us." About what? About Dad. About who he talked to in those last few weeks. About— Carl rubbed his face. About who might have wanted him dead. Emma thought about that. About her grandfather, a quiet man who farmed his land and minded his own business, who loved his wife and his sons and his Farmall tractor, who found something someone wanted buried. "I didn't know him, Dad." Emma's voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "I was 7 when he disappeared. I don't remember him." "I know. But I remember you after. I remember how you changed, how Uncle Pete changed, how Grandma just—" She stopped. "I remember the shape of him, the hole he left." Carl was quiet for a long moment. "He was a good man," he said finally. "Stubborn as hell, but good. He believed in doing the right thing, even when it cost him." "Sounds like it cost him everything." "Yeah." Carl looked out at the fields. Dead grass, dead crops, everything brown and brittle. "Yeah, it did." They stood there as the sun set, watching the shadows grow long, listening to the horses breathe in their stalls. Tomorrow they'd start digging, not into the earth this time, into the past. Sheriff Morrison's office smelled like burnt coffee and paper dust. Emma sat between her father and uncle, all 3 of them crammed onto a cracked leather couch that had probably been there since the 80s. Grandma Dot sat in the chair across from Morrison's desk, spine straight, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for church to start. Morrison himself looked like he hadn't slept in days. Gray stubble on his jaw, eyes bloodshot. He'd been sheriff for 12 years, but before that he'd been a deputy. He'd worked Walt's disappearance back in '96. "I appreciate you all coming in." Morrison set down his coffee mug. The ceramic was chipped. "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask some questions about the weeks before Walt disappeared. Anything unusual he said or did? Anyone he might have had conflict with?" "He was worried?" Dorothy's voice cut through before anyone else could speak. "The last month, maybe 6 weeks before he vanished. He wasn't sleeping right. I'd wake up at 2, 3 in the morning, and his side of the bed would be empty. Find him sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, just staring out the window." Morrison pulled out a notepad, started writing. "Did he say what was bothering him?" "No." Dorothy's jaw tightened. "I asked, more than once. He'd just say it was farm business, nothing for me to worry about." She looked at Morrison. "Walter never kept things from me, not in 40 years of marriage, but those last weeks he did. And I knew. I knew something was very wrong." Carl shifted beside Emma. "He was paranoid," he said quietly. "Started locking the gates at night? All of them. We've got a half-mile of fence line, and he'd drive around every evening, checking every gate was padlocked. Said he'd seen truck tracks on the back 40, people where they shouldn't be. Did you believe him? Morrison asked. Carl's face went tight. No, I thought he was... He stopped. I thought he was getting old. Seeing things that weren't there. We had an argument about it. I told him he was being paranoid, told him nobody gave a damn about our property. The muscle in Carl's jaw was jumping. Emma reached over, put her hand on his arm. He didn't acknowledge it. When was this argument? Morrison asked. September 10th, 4 days before he disappeared. Carl's voice had gone flat. Last real conversation we had. I told my father he was losing it, then he vanished, and I spent 15 years thinking. He didn't finish, didn't need to. Morrison wrote that down. Pete, what about you? Did you notice anything? Pete had been quiet until now. He sat forward, elbows on his knees. Yeah, Dad was acting strange, started taking soil samples from the back fields. I asked him why. He said he wanted to test the pH levels, make sure we weren't losing nutrients. But that didn't make sense. We'd tested that soil the year before. Everything was fine. Did you see the results of those tests? No. He said he was sending them to some lab in Kansas City. Didn't want to use the local extension office. Pete rubbed his face. And he started carrying this notebook everywhere. Little black thing, fit in his shirt pocket. He'd write in it constantly. I asked him what he was documenting, and he told me to mind my own business. Morrison looked up. Do you know what happened to that notebook? No. Never saw it after he disappeared. Emma thought about the document they'd found in the tractor, the waterproof bag, her grandfather hiding evidence where nobody would find it unless they found him. What about the property itself? Morrison asked. The back 40 where he was checking that day. Anything unusual about that area? Carl and Pete looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. It's the most remote part of the property, Carl said finally. Borders the old Gaines farm to the east, county road on the south. We don't use it much. Ground's too poor for crops, not enough grass for grazing. Dad kept it mainly because his father had kept it. Sentimental value. The Gaines farm, Morrison repeated. He was writing again. That's Mitchell Gaines? Yeah. Pete's voice had changed, gone careful. You think Mitch is involved in this? Morrison didn't answer directly. How well did your father know Mitchell Gaines? They'd been neighbors for 30 years, Dorothy said. Mitchell's father and Walter's father were friends. The boys, Walter and Mitchell, they grew up together. Not close, but friendly enough. Mitchell helped search when Walter went missing. Spent 3 days on horseback, covering the back sections. Emma watched Morrison's face. Saw something there. A tightness around his eyes. What? Emma asked. What is it? Morrison set down his pen. Mitchell Gaines is the regional manager for Heartland Futures Incorporated, has been since 1994. They're an agricultural supply company, fertilizers, pesticides, equipment leasing. The air in the room changed. Jesus, Pete breathed. We're looking into their operations in 95 and 96, Morrison continued, specifically their waste disposal practices. The EPA has had complaints about them before. Nothing that stuck, but... He looked at Dorothy. Mrs. Drummond, did your husband ever mention Heartland Futures? Dorothy was very still. Not by name, but in August, maybe late July. He came home furious. Wouldn't tell me why, just kept saying someone was using our land without permission, that he'd find out who, and they'd pay for it. She paused. He was on the phone later that night. I heard him say something about testing and contamination, and then he said a name. Mitchell? The silence was thick enough to cut. Why didn't you tell the sheriff's department this 15 years ago? Morrison's voice was gentle, but Emma heard the edge underneath. Because I didn't think it mattered. Dorothy's hands had started to shake, just slightly. Mitchell told me himself he'd talked to Walter that week, said Walt had asked him about fertilizer runoff, some concern about the groundwater. Mitchell said he'd explained it was all EPA approved, nothing to worry about. He made it sound so normal, so reasonable. Her voice cracked. Mitchell brought me casseroles after Walt disappeared. He came to the memorial service. He looked me in the eye and told me how sorry he was. Emma felt sick. Morrison closed his notebook. I need to ask you all to keep this conversation confidential. If Gaines is involved, we can't spook him. Not yet. You think he killed my father? Carl's voice was dangerous, quiet and dangerous. I think your father found something, and I think someone wanted him quiet. Morrison met Carl's eyes. But I need evidence. Real, prosecutable evidence. That means doing this right. That means being patient. Patient? Carl laughed, no humor in it. We've been patient for 15 years. They left the sheriff's office at noon. The heat had gotten worse. Temperature gauge on the bank across the street read 104 degrees. Emma felt like she was breathing through wet cotton. Her father didn't speak on the drive home, just gripped the steering wheel and stared at the road. Pete had gone ahead in his own truck. Grandma Dot sat in the back seat, silent. When they pulled into the farmhouse driveway, Emma saw an unfamiliar car parked near the barn, a silver sedan, too clean for farm country. "Who's that?" Emma asked. Carl shut off the engine. Didn't move. "Don't know." The car door opened. A woman stepped out, early 30s, dark blazer and slacks despite the heat. Professional. She had a briefcase and a camera around her neck. "Mr. Drummond?" She walked toward them. "I'm Sophie Valdez with the Kansas City Star. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your father's case." Carl's face went hard. "No comment. I understand this is difficult, but—" "I said no comment." Carl was out of the truck now, moving toward her, not threatening, but his body language was clear. "You need to leave. The public has a right to know when there's possible environmental contamination. Get off my property." Sophie Valdez stood her ground. "Mr. Drummond, if Heartland Futures was illegally dumping toxic waste on farmland, that affects the entire county. People deserve to know." "How do you know about Heartland Futures?" Emma was out of the truck now, too. "That information hasn't been released." Valdez looked at her, sharp eyes, calculating. "I have sources." "You have Morrison's office leaking," Carl snapped, "and I don't care. I'm not talking to the press, not now, not ever. Now get the hell off my land before I call the sheriff." For a moment, Valdez looked like she might argue, then she reached into her briefcase, pulled out a business card, held it out. "If you change your mind, or if you find anything you think people should know about." She looked between Carl and Emma. Sometimes the only way to get justice is to make it impossible to hide. Carl didn't take the card. Valdez set it on the hood of his truck and walked back to her car. A minute later she was gone, dust trailing behind her on the gravel road. Emma picked up the card, turned it over. On the back, handwritten, "I've been investigating Heartland Futures for 2 years. I know what they did. Call me." She handed it to her father. Carl stared at it for a long moment, then shoved it in his pocket. "Let's go check on Mom." Dorothy was making lunch when they came in, sandwiches, methodical and precise. She'd changed out of her church dress, back into everyday clothes. Like if she kept moving, kept her hands busy, she wouldn't have to think. "Grandma," Emma said gently, "you don't have to." "I'm fine." Dorothy sliced through a tomato with more force than necessary. "I need to do something. I can't just sit." Pete was already at the kitchen table. He'd beaten them back somehow, had a laptop open in front of him, frowning at the screen. "What are you looking at?" Carl asked. "Heartland Futures." Pete turned the laptop so they could see. A corporate website, smiling farmers, green fields, promises of sustainable agriculture. "They've got operations in 6 states, headquarters in Wichita. And look at this." He clicked to a news article, 5 years old. Headline, "Heartland Futures settles EPA complaint for improper waste disposal." Emma leaned closer. What did they do? "Pesticide waste dumping in Clay County. Company paid a fine, claimed it was a rogue employee, promised new protocols." Pete scrolled down. "But look at the fine. $50,000. That's nothing for a company this size." Slap on the wrist. "And they did it again," Carl said quietly. "On our land." Dorothy set down the knife, turned to face them. Walter would have gone to the EPA or the county environmental office. He wouldn't have just documented it. He would have reported it. "Maybe he did," Emma said. "Maybe that's why they killed him." Because he was about to blow the whistle. Pete was typing again. "I'm looking for EPA complaints filed in Barton County in 1996. If Dad reported something, there should be a record." They waited. The only sound was the clicking of keys and the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Pete sat back. Nothing. No complaints filed in 96 or 97 about Heartland Futures. No complaints at all from our property. "They killed him before he could file," Carl said, "or the complaint was buried." Dorothy's voice was hard. "Mitchell Gaines had connections. His family's been in this county for generations. If he made a call to the right person, a complaint could disappear." Emma thought about the document in the tractor, the soil test results. Her grandfather had been collecting evidence, hiding it, getting ready to do something. But he'd run out of time. "Morrison needs to see this," Pete said, gesturing to the laptop. "The EPA complaint, the pattern of violations. This isn't just murder. This is corporate crime." "He already knows." Carl was staring out the window at the brown fields. "He's been working this case for 3 days. He knows about Heartland Futures. He knows about Gaines." He turned to look at them. "But knowing and proving are different things. We need more than suspicion." "We need Dad's notebook," Emma said. "The one Pete mentioned. That's where he'd have kept everything. Observations, dates, evidence. If we can find it." "It's been 15 years, Pete said. If it still exists, it could be anywhere." Dorothy had gone very still. She was looking at something on the counter. An old photo in a frame. Walt and her on their wedding day, both of them young and smiling. "The tractor," she said suddenly. They all turned to look at her. "What about it?" Carl asked. The tractor was Walter's sanctuary. He kept things in it, tools, work gloves, personal things. Dorothy's voice was getting faster now. "When you boys were little and he needed to think, he'd go sit in that tractor, just sit there with his coffee and think." She looked at Morrison. "If he was hiding something, really hiding it, he'd have put it in the tractor." "We already searched it," Pete said gently. "The forensic team went through everything." "Did they check under the seat?" Dorothy moved toward the door. "Not just the storage compartment, under the seat, the actual frame. Walter and his father built a false bottom in that tractor in 1979. I watched them do it. Said every farmer needed a place to keep important papers where they wouldn't get stolen." Emma and Carl looked at each other. "Mom," Carl said carefully, "are you sure?" "I'm sure." Dorothy was already reaching for her coat. "I'm sure because Walter showed me what he kept in there. The deed to the farm, his father's will, things that mattered." She looked at her sons. "If he found evidence someone was poisoning our land, that's where he'd keep it. That's where he'd know it would be safe." "The tractor's in the sheriff's impound," Pete said. "Then we call Morrison." Dorothy had her phone out. "Right now, we call him and we tell him to check again. Check properly." Carl put his hand over hers. "Mom, if there's something there, if there's evidence, we can't contaminate it. We can't touch it ourselves. Morrison needs to do this officially." Then we tell him how to do it. Dorothy pulled her hand away. "We tell him about the false bottom. We tell him exactly where to look." Her voice cracked. "Walter died protecting that information. The least we can do is make sure it wasn't for nothing." Morrison came out to the farm that evening, listened while Dorothy explained the false bottom, drew a diagram showing exactly where it was located. He didn't make any promises. Just said he'd check first thing in the morning. Emma couldn't sleep that night. Lay in her old bedroom, she'd been staying at the farmhouse since the discovery, didn't want to leave her dad alone, and stared at the ceiling. Listened to the house settle. Heard her father moving around downstairs at 2 in the morning, the same insomnia that had plagued him since they'd found the tractor. She thought about her grandfather, about the last morning of his life. kissing his wife goodbye, climbing onto his Farmall, driving to the back 40 to check the irrigation pond. Had he known he was in danger? Had he suspected? Or had it caught him completely by surprise? A voice calling his name, turning around, the blow from behind that he never saw coming. Emma rolled over, pulled the quilt up to her chin, even though the room was hot. Outside, the wind picked up, dry and harsh, rattling the window frames. Drought wind, the kind that carried dust and dead grass and the smell of everything dying. Somewhere out in the darkness, someone had killed her grandfather and buried him with his tractor and his secrets. Someone who'd watched the family grieve for 15 years. Someone who thought they'd gotten away with it. Emma closed her eyes, made herself a promise. They hadn't. Morrison called at 7 the next morning. Emma heard her father's phone ring, heard him answer it in the kitchen below her room. She was out of bed and down the stairs in seconds, still in her sleep shirt and bare feet. Carl had the phone on speaker. Morrison's voice crackled through, tinny and distant. "Opened the compartment at 6:30 this morning. Your mother was right. There's a false bottom. And, Carl, there's something in it." Emma watched her father's hand tighten around the phone. "What?" "Documents. Sealed in a plastic bag, same as the other one, but this bag held up better. Must have been higher quality. The papers inside look intact." A pause. "There's also a cassette tape." "A tape?" Carl's voice was hoarse. "Audio cassette, sealed in its own bag. Label says September 12th, 1996, 2 days before your father disappeared." Morrison's voice got quieter. "I'm bringing everything to the document specialist this morning." "But Carl," I looked at the top page through the plastic. "It's handwritten notes, dates, times, vehicle descriptions. Your father was surveilling someone." Emma felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. "How long before we know what's on that tape?" Carl asked. "Couple hours. The cassette looks good. If the tape itself isn't degraded, we should be able to play it. I'll call you the minute we know." "I want to be there," Carl said. "When you play it, I want to hear my father's voice." Silence on the other end. Then, "Okay. Come to my office at 10. Bring Pete and your mother. And Carl, prepare yourself. Whatever's on that tape, it got your father killed." The drive to the sheriff's office felt longer than it should have. Emma sat in the back of her father's truck next to her grandmother. Nobody spoke. Pete followed in his own vehicle, and when they all converged in the parking lot, Emma could see the same tension in his face that she felt in her own chest. Morrison met them at the door. He looked worse than yesterday, clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. Probably had. "The specialist just finished," he said without preamble. "Tape's playable. Audio quality isn't perfect, but it's clear enough." He looked at Dorothy. "Ma'am, I need to warn you. This might be difficult to hear." "Everything about this has been difficult." Dorothy's voice was steel. "Play the tape." They gathered in Morrison's office. The cassette player sat on the desk, one of those old combination units with a radio and tape deck that probably hadn't been used in years. Morrison had already loaded the tape. His hand hovered over the play button. "This is evidence in an active homicide investigation," he said. "What you're about to hear doesn't leave this room." "Understood?" They all nodded. Morrison pressed play. Static first, then the sound of wind, a truck engine running in the background. When Walt Drummond's voice came through the speakers, Emma felt her grandmother's hand find hers and squeeze. September 12th, 10:47 p.m. Walt's voice was rough, tired. "This is the 4th night I've watched the back gate. 4th night I've seen the same pattern." A pause, the sound of paper rustling. "White Ford F-250, covered bed. No plates visible. They tape over them. Comes in around 10:30, leaves around midnight. Always the same truck, always the same route. Takes the service road along the irrigation pond, parks by the old equipment shed." Emma watched her father. He'd gone absolutely still, eyes fixed on the tape player like he could see through it to 15 years ago. "I got close enough tonight to see what they're doing." Walt's voice changed, got harder. "They're dumping?" 55-gallon drums, rolling them off the truck bed into the ravine by the pond. 8 drums tonight. I counted. A long breath. The drums have markings. Can't read them all in the dark, but I got the company name. Heartland Futures Incorporated. Dorothy made a sound, small and broken. I took soil samples 2 weeks ago from the area around the pond. Sent them to a private lab in Kansas City. Couldn't trust the local extension office, not with Mitchell Gaines on the board. Another pause. Results came back yesterday. Chlorpyrifos levels 40 times the safe limit. Atrazine contamination. The groundwater under that section is poisoned. Has been for months, maybe longer. The tape hissed. Wind. Engine idle. I confronted Mitchell yesterday, told him what I found. He denied everything, said I was mistaken, said Heartland Futures follows all EPA protocols, said if there's contamination, it must be from somewhere else. Walt's laugh was bitter. But I saw his face. He knew exactly what I was talking about. More rustling, the click of a pen. I'm documenting everything. Dates, times, weather conditions, vehicle descriptions. I've got the soil tests. I've got photographs of the drums. Took them tonight with the telephoto lens. I'm going to the EPA on Monday, and if they won't listen, I'll go to the state attorney general. I'll go to the goddamn newspapers if I have to. His voice got quieter. This is our land. My father's land. His father's land. They're poisoning it for profit, and they think I'm too old and too dumb to figure it out. Silence. Then, if something happens to me, if I don't make it to Monday, Dorothy, Carl, Pete, you're hearing this. This isn't paranoia. This isn't me being stubborn or difficult. This is real. His voice cracked slightly. I've hidden copies of everything. The soil tests, the photographs, all my notes. They're in the tractor, in the compartment Dad and I built. If I'm gone, you find them. You take them to the EPA. You make sure these bastards pay for what they've done. A long pause. Wind. The engine ticking over. I love you, Dot. Tell the boys I love them. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you what was happening. I just wanted to protect you, wanted to handle it myself. His voice was barely a whisper now. I should have told you. Should have trusted you with it. But I was scared. Scared of what they might do if they knew you knew. The tape went quiet. Just wind and static. Then Walt's voice one more time, so soft Emma almost missed it. I'm tired. So damn tired, but I can't let this go. Can't let them get away with it. Click. The tape ran on, nothing but white noise. Morrison reached over and stopped it. The silence in the office was absolute. Emma looked at her grandmother. Tears were streaming down Dorothy's face, but she wasn't making a sound. Just sitting there, perfectly still, while her husband's voice echoed in the space between them. Carl had his head in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. Pete stood at the window, back to all of them, one hand pressed flat against the glass. There's more. Morrison's voice was gentle, careful. The documents we found, it's all there. Surveillance notes covering 3 weeks. 37 vehicles documented, all coming to dump at that site. Photographs of the drums. The soil test results showing exactly what Walt said. And he pulled out a plastic evidence bag. This was paper clipped to the notes. A letter. He set it on the desk where they could see. The letter was on Heartland Futures letterhead. Typed, Farmall, dated September 11th, 1996. Mr. Drummond, I must advise you to cease and desist from any further inquiry into Heartland Futures operations. Your concerns regarding environmental compliance have been noted and reviewed by our legal department. We have determined that all company activities are fully compliant with state and federal regulations. Any suggestion otherwise is both inaccurate and potentially libelous. Continued harassment of our employees or interference with our business operations will result in legal action. Furthermore, I must caution you that spreading unfounded accusations about our company could have serious consequences, both legal and otherwise. I strongly suggest you focus on your own affairs and leave corporate operations to those who understand them. Regards, Mitchell Gaines, Regional Manager, Heartland Futures, Incorporated. Emma read it twice. The language was formal, professional, but the threat was clear as day. Serious consequences, both legal and otherwise. "That's a death threat," Pete said from the window. His voice was flat. "That's a goddamn death threat in writing." "It's a threat," Morrison agreed. "Whether it's enough to prove murder, that's harder. Good lawyers could argue it's just corporate posturing, but combined with everything else—" He gestured to the tape player, the documents. "We've got motive. We've got your father discovering a crime. We've got Gaines threatening him. And we've got your father dead 2 days later. You need to arrest him." Carl's voice was rough, scraped raw. "Right now. Today. I need more than this." "More?" Carl was on his feet. "What the hell more do you need? You've got Dad's testimony. You've got written threats. I've got 15-year-old evidence of illegal dumping and a threatening letter. What I don't have is proof that Mitchell Gaines killed your father." Morrison stood too. "Carl, listen to me. I want this bastard as much as you do. But if I arrest him now on what we've got, his lawyers will have him out in hours. And then he'll lawyer up so tight we'll never get near him. I need to build an airtight case. While he walks around free," Carl's hands were shaking, "while he goes to work, goes home, lives his life. While we investigate—" Morrison's voice was firm. "While we find witnesses who saw the dumping. While we track down the other drivers who worked for Heartland Futures in '96. While we find the deputy who closed your father's case without a real investigation because someone paid him off or pressured him. That's how we make sure Gaines goes to prison for the rest of his life instead of beating this on a technicality." Dorothy stood up, walked to Morrison's desk, put both hands flat on the surface, and leaned forward. "How long?" Her voice was quiet, dangerous. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'm coordinating with the EPA and the State Attorney General's office. They're looking at bringing federal charges for the environmental crimes. That gives us leverage." 3 weeks. Dorothy straightened. "Fine. You have 3 weeks to build your case. But if Mitchell Gaines tries to run, if he tries to destroy evidence, if he does anything that looks like he's covering his tracks, you arrest him. Immediately. I don't care if the case is perfect. You arrest him." Morrison nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." They left the sheriff's office at noon. The temperature had climbed past 100, heat that made the air shimmer, made breathing feel like work. Emma's shirt stuck to her back before she even reached the truck. Pete pulled Carl aside in the parking lot. Emma couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the intensity in Pete's face, the way Carl kept shaking his head. Finally, Carl turned and walked to his truck. Pete stood there a moment longer, then got in his own vehicle and drove off in the opposite direction. "What was that about?" Emma asked as they pulled onto the main road. "Pete wants to go to Gaines's house, confront him directly." Carl's jaw was tight. "I told him that's the stupidest thing he could do." "Morrison's right. We need to be smart about this." "Do you think Pete will listen?" Carl didn't answer, just drove, knuckles white on the steering wheel. They were halfway home when Emma saw it. A white truck parked on the shoulder of the county road that bordered their property. The same Ford F-250 model Walt had described on the tape. No plates visible. "Dad," Emma pointed. "Look." Carl slowed. The truck sat empty, windows down. 50 yards past it, someone was walking along the fence line. Dark jeans, work shirt. Too far away to see clearly in the heat shimmer. Carl pulled over, cut the engine. "Dad, we should call Morrison." "Stay in the truck." Carl was already out, moving toward the fence. Emma looked at her grandmother. Dorothy had gone very still, staring at the white truck. "That's the vehicle." Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. "The one Walter described?" "The one from the tape." Emma grabbed her phone, dialed Morrison. It went to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. "Damn it!" She shoved the phone in her pocket, looked at her grandmother. "Stay here. Lock the doors." "Emma!" But Emma was already out of the truck, jogging after her father. The heat hit her like a physical thing. Sweat broke out across her forehead immediately. Carl had reached the fence line. The figure ahead of him had stopped walking, was turning around. Emma got close enough to see clearly just as the man spoke. "This is private property." The voice was rough, sun-damaged. "You're trespassing." "This is my property." Carl gestured to the fence. "You're the one who's trespassing." "Who are you?" The man was in his 50s, maybe, weathered face, work-rough hands. He looked at Carl for a long moment, then at Emma approaching behind him. "I'm nobody." He started walking again toward his truck. "Just checking the fence line." "Like hell you are." Carl moved to block him. "What are you doing on my land?" "I told you." Checking the fence. "For who?" The man's jaw tightened. "Look, friend, you don't want this trouble. Just let me get back to my truck and we'll forget we ever saw each other." "I asked you a question." Carl's voice was getting louder. "Who are you working for?" The man looked past Carl to his white truck, then back to Carl. Something in his expression changed, hardened. "You're Drummond's son, the one who found the tractor." The air went cold despite the heat. Emma felt her pulse kick up. "How do you know that?" she asked. The man ignored her, kept his eyes on Carl. "Your father should have minded his own business, should have let things alone." Carl went very still. "What did you say?" "I said he should have let it alone, should have kept his mouth shut." The man's voice was matter-of-fact, casual. "But he didn't. And look what happened. Everything happened fast then." Carl lunged forward, grabbed the man by his shirt. The man shoved back, hard. Carl stumbled, caught himself. "Dad!" Emma ran forward, got between them. "Stop!" The man backed away, hands up. "I didn't touch him. You both saw that. He came at me." "Who are you?" Emma's voice shook. "Who do you work for?" The man smiled, no warmth in it. "You already know. You're just too scared to admit it." He turned and walked back to his truck. Carl tried to follow, but Emma held him back, her hand on his arm. "Let him go. We've got his truck on record. We can ID him from that." The man climbed into his F-250, started the engine. Before he pulled away, he leaned out the window. "Tell Morrison he's wasting his time. Nobody's going to testify. Nobody's going to break. And that tape?" He shook his head. "Dead men can't testify either." The truck pulled onto the road. Emma was already taking photos with her phone. The vehicle, the plates that weren't there, the man's face through the window. Carl stood rigid beside her, breathing hard. "We need to call Morrison," Emma said. "Right now." But her father wasn't listening. He was staring at the fence line where the man had been walking, at the section of fence closest to where the irrigation pond used to be. "Emma!" His voice was strange. "Look at the ground." She followed his gaze. The earth along the fence line was disturbed, freshly disturbed. You could see where the dry topsoil had been moved aside, darker earth underneath. "Someone's been digging here," Carl said quietly. "Recently." Emma moved closer. The disturbed area ran for maybe 20 feet along the fence. In some spots, you could still see the outline of boot prints in the loose soil. "What were they looking for?" Emma asked. Her father's face had gone pale. "Not looking. Checking?" They were checking to see if anything else was buried here. The implication settled over them like cold water. "The drums," Emma whispered. "The ones Grandpa saw them dump?" "They're checking to see if they're still there." Carl pulled out his phone. This time, when he called Morrison, the sheriff picked up on the first ring. "We've got a problem," Carl said. "Someone from Heartland Futures just confronted us on our property. And they've been digging along the fence line by the old pond site." Silence. Then Morrison's voice, tight and urgent. "Get off that property. Right now, both of you. Get your mother and go to your house and stay there. I'm sending units to secure the site." "Morrison." "Now, Carl. These people killed your father to keep this quiet. They're not going to hesitate to do it again." The call cut off. Emma and Carl looked at each other. Then, without speaking, they both turned and ran back to the truck. Morrison's deputies arrived within 20 minutes. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing. They cordoned off the fence line with crime scene tape while Emma, Carl, and Dorothy watched from the farmhouse porch. Emma made coffee. Nobody drank. Her hands were still shaking from the confrontation. She kept seeing that man's face, the casual way he'd talked about her grandfather. Should have kept his mouth shut. Carl paced the kitchen, back and forth, back and forth. His phone rang twice, both times Morrison, both times Carl stepped outside to take the call. When he came back in after the second one, his face was grim. "They found them," he said. "The drums. Buried 3 feet down, exactly where Dad said they'd be dumping. 32 55-gallon drums. Most of them are corroded, leaking into the soil." Dorothy set down her coffee cup. "How bad?" "Bad enough that the EPA is sending a hazmat team tomorrow. Morrison says the contamination zone might extend under half our back 40. Carl's voice was flat. "Our land, our water table, poisoned for profit." "Can it be cleaned up?" Emma asked. "Morrison doesn't know. Says it depends on how deep it's gone, how far it's spread. Could take years. Could cost—" He stopped, rubbed his face. "Could cost more than the farm is worth." The silence was heavy. Emma thought about her grandfather working this land for 40 years. Thought about him discovering the contamination, trying to stop it, dying for it. "The man at the fence," Dorothy said quietly. "Did Morrison identify him?" "Not yet. But he's running the description, checking employment records for Heartland Futures from '96. Carl sat down heavily. "He also wants us to think about protection. Says we should stay somewhere else for a few days while they investigate." "Absolutely not." Dorothy's voice was steel. "I'm not leaving this house. I didn't leave when Walter disappeared. I'm not leaving now." "Mom." "No." She looked at her sons. "They've taken enough. They took Walter. They took 15 years of our lives. They poisoned our land. I will not let them take this house too." Carl opened his mouth to argue, closed it. He knew that tone. They all did. Emma's phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Sophie Valdez, the journalist. I heard about the drums. We need to talk." Emma showed it to her father. "Don't respond," Carl said immediately. "Last thing we need is the press making this harder." But Emma was thinking about the business card Valdez had left, the handwritten note on the back. "I've been investigating Heartland Futures for 2 years. I know what they did." "Dad," Emma said slowly. "What if she can help?" "Help how?" "Morrison said he needs witnesses. People who worked for Heartland Futures who'll talk. What if Valdez has sources? What if she's already found people?" Carl was shaking his head. "We're not talking to a reporter." "Why not?" Emma pressed. "Grandpa said it on the tape. If the EPA wouldn't listen, he'd go to the newspapers. Maybe that's what we should do. Make this public. Make it impossible for them to bury." "Emma." "She's right." Dorothy stood up. Walter knew publicity was protection, knew they couldn't touch him if everyone was watching. Her voice got harder, but he didn't get the chance. "We do. We can finish what he started." Carl looked between them. His jaw was clenched. Finally, "I'll think about it." But nobody contacts anyone without Morrison knowing first. The hazmat team arrived at dawn the next day. Emma watched from her bedroom window as they set up, white suits, equipment, trucks with government plates. They worked all day, taking samples, measuring, documenting. By sunset, they'd established a contamination perimeter covering 8 acres. Morrison came by that evening with the preliminary report. The contamination was worse than anyone thought. Not just pesticides, heavy metals, industrial solvents, compounds that had no business being anywhere near farmland. "This wasn't just waste disposal," Morrison said. "This was everything Heartland Futures wanted to get rid of. Your property was their illegal dump site." "For how long?" Carl asked. "We're still determining that. But based on the degradation of the drums and the spread of contamination, could be as far back as '93 or '94. years before your father caught them. Emma did the math. That's hundreds of trucks, hundreds of loads. Someone had to notice. Someone did notice. Morrison pulled out a file. We found him. The man from the fence line. His name is Ray Hoskins. Worked as a driver for Heartland Futures from '94 to '98. Still does occasional contract work for them. You arrested him? Pete had arrived an hour earlier, hadn't left Dorothy's side since. We brought him in for questioning. He lawyered up immediately. Won't say a word. Morrison's expression darkened. But here's the thing. Hoskins has a record. Assault, criminal mischief. He did 18 months in Hutchinson in 2003. He's exactly the kind of guy you hire when you need someone who doesn't ask questions and doesn't talk. He threatened us, Emma said, told us to back off. I know, that's witness intimidation. I can charge him for that. But it's a misdemeanor unless I can prove it was part of a larger conspiracy. Morrison looked at Carl. Did he say anything specific about Gaines? About who gave him orders? Emma replayed the conversation in her head. You already know. You're just too scared to admit it. He didn't name anyone, she said quietly. He was careful. Morrison nodded, like he'd expected that. These guys are professionals at staying just on the right side of deniability. But we're building the case. We've got the drums. We've got your father's evidence. We're tracking down other drivers who worked for Heartland Futures. Someone will break eventually. Eventually. Carl's voice was bitter. While Gaines walks around free. Not for long. Morrison's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned. I need to take this. Excuse me. He stepped outside. Through the window, Emma watched him pace on the porch, phone pressed to his ear. His body language changed, shoulders tensing, head dropping. When he came back in, his face was ashen. What? Dorothy asked immediately. That was the state attorney general's office. Morrison sat down slowly. Mitchell Gaines filed a lawsuit this afternoon, against the county, against me personally, and against your family. He's claiming defamation, harassment, and interference with his business. He's demanding all evidence be sealed pending review. The room went silent. He can't do that, Pete said. Can he? He can try. And with the right lawyer, which he definitely has, he can tie this up in court for months, maybe years. Morrison looked at each of them. He's going on offense, trying to make us look like we're the ones harassing him instead of investigating a crime. Emma felt something cold settle in her chest. So he gets away with it. I didn't say that, Morrison's voice was firm. I said he's trying. But attempted murder of a case doesn't make the evidence disappear. The drums are real. Your father's testimony is real. The contamination is real. No lawsuit changes that. But it delays justice, Dorothy said quietly. Morrison didn't answer, didn't need to. Emma couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed thinking about her grandfather's voice on that tape. Tired, scared, but determined to do the right thing. At 2 a.m, she got up, pulled out her phone, stared at Sophie Valdez's text message. Morrison had said to build a case through proper channels. But proper channels had failed her grandfather. Someone had buried his EPA complaint, if he'd even gotten to file it. Someone had closed his missing person case without a real investigation. Someone had let Mitchell Gaines operate for 15 years without consequences. Emma opened a new text, typed, "Can you meet tomorrow? I'll talk to you. But off the record first." The response came back almost immediately. Yes? Name the place? Emma gave her the address of a diner 2 towns over, somewhere nobody would recognize them. She deleted the messages. Put her phone away. Tried not to think about what her father would say if he knew. But she kept hearing her grandfather's voice. I'll go to the goddamn newspapers if I have to. Someone had to finish what Walt started. Emma told her father she was driving to the county extension office to file drought relief paperwork. Not entirely a lie. She did need to file, just wasn't going there first. The diner sat on the edge of Highway 56, one of those places that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. Faded vinyl booths, linoleum floor cracked at the seams, a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since opening day. Emma spotted Sophie Valdez immediately. Same dark blazer, laptop open on the table, coffee cup already half empty. Valdez looked up as Emma slid into the booth. "Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not promising anything," Emma said, "and this stays off the record until I say otherwise." "Understood?" Valdez closed her laptop. "Can I ask why you changed your mind?" "Because you said you've been investigating Heartland Futures for 2 years." "Because my grandfather died trying to expose them, and because they're fighting back with lawsuits instead of letting justice happen." Emma leaned forward. "What do you know?" Valdez pulled out a notebook, flipped it open. Heartland Futures has been illegally disposing of hazardous waste for at least 15 years, maybe longer. They operate in 6 states, and in every single one there are complaints. Mysterious illnesses in farming communities, groundwater contamination, dead livestock, and in every case, the company pays a small fine and moves on. Why haven't they been shut down? Money? Political connections. They donate heavily to state politicians, serve on agricultural boards, sponsor farming programs. They're embedded in the system. Valdez tapped her notebook. "But I've found patterns. At least 9 properties in Kansas alone where they dumped illegally. And I've found 3 former employees willing to talk, off the record for now. They're scared, with good reason." Emma thought about Ray Hoskins at the fence line, the casual threat in his voice. "What about Mitchell Gaines specifically?" Emma asked. Valdez's expression hardened. "Gaines is the enforcer. When there's a problem, he handles it. When someone asks too many questions, he makes them go away, sometimes with money, sometimes with threats, sometimes—" She stopped. "Your grandfather wasn't the first person to discover their dumping operation, but he might be the first one who refused to be bought or scared off." The words hit like a physical blow. Emma's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "There were others?" Her voice came out rough. "A farmer in Ellis County in 1998 found drums on his property, started asking questions. 2 weeks later, his barn burned down, lost everything. No one could prove arson, but the investigation stopped." Valdez flipped pages. "A county inspector in Rooks County in 2003 started looking into Heartland Futures disposal records, got transferred to a desk job in Topeka before he could file a report. And a journalist, my predecessor at the Star, who was working on this story in 2009. His editor killed the piece. No explanation, just said it wasn't worth pursuing." "So they've been getting away with this for decades." "Yes, because they're good at making problems disappear, and because most people don't want to fight a corporation with unlimited legal resources." Valdez looked at Emma. "But your family's different. You've got physical evidence. You've got your grandfather's testimony on tape. You've got drums buried on your property. That's more than anyone else has ever had. Gaines filed a lawsuit. He's trying to bury it anyway." "Of course he is." "It's what he does, but here's what he doesn't know." Valdez leaned closer. "I've been talking to the EPA. There's a federal investigation opening, not just into the dumping, but into the entire company. If we can prove a pattern of criminal activity across state lines, that's RICO territory. That's the kind of case that brings down corporations." Emma's pulse quickened. "What do you need from us?" "Everything. Your grandfather's tape, his documents, the soil tests. I need to publish this story before Gaines can bury it in court. Once it's public, once people know what happened, he can't make it disappear. My father won't agree to this. He wants to go through proper channels." "Proper channels failed your grandfather." Valdez's voice was gentle but firm. "Someone buried his EPA complaint. Someone closed his case without investigation. The system protected Gaines 15 years ago. What makes you think it won't protect him now?" Emma stared at her coffee, thought about her father's face when they'd played the tape, thought about her grandmother, waiting 15 years for answers, thought about Walt Drummond, tired and scared, saying he'd go to the newspapers if he had to. "I need to talk to my family first," Emma said finally. "If we do this, we do it together." "Fair enough." "But Emma—" Valdez pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back. "Time matters. Every day Gaines has to prepare is a day he can destroy evidence, pressure witnesses, build his defense. The element of surprise is the only advantage you have." Emma took the card, slid out of the booth. "I'll call you by tomorrow night." She drove back to the farm with Valdez's words circling in her head. "Proper channels failed your grandfather." It was true. Emma knew it was true. But convincing her father would be another thing entirely. When she pulled into the driveway, she found Carl and Pete standing by the machine shed with Sheriff Morrison. Their body language told her something had happened. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, climbing out of the truck. Morrison turned. His face was grim. "We lost our witness. The deputy who closed your grandfather's case in '96, Dennis Collar. He died this morning." Emma felt the ground tilt. "Died how?" "Single vehicle accident on Highway 96. Went off the road, hit a tree. Pronounced dead at the scene." Morrison's jaw was tight. "No skid marks, no sign he tried to brake?" "That's not an accident," Pete said flatly. "We don't know that." But Morrison's tone said he was thinking the same thing. "State police are investigating, but Collar, if he was paid off to close your father's case, if he knew who killed Walt, that knowledge died with him this morning." Carl had gone very pale. "They're cleaning up. Eliminating anyone who can connect them to Dad's murder." "I don't know," Morrison said. "Maybe. Or maybe it really was an accident. Collar was 68, had heart problems, could have had a cardiac event behind the wheel." "You don't believe that?" Emma's voice was steady. "None of us believe that." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I don't believe it, but I can't prove it. Not yet." "How many more people have to die before you can?" Carl's voice was rising. "First Dad, now Collar. Who's next? Ray Hoskins? One of the other drivers? How many witnesses are going to have convenient accidents before you—" "Carl." Morrison's voice cut through. "I am doing everything I can. But I need evidence, real, court-admissible evidence, not speculation." "Then get it faster." Morrison's expression hardened. "I'm running a murder investigation, not a political campaign. This takes time, and if we rush it, if we make one mistake, Gaines walks. Is that what you want?" Carl opened his mouth, closed it. The fight went out of him. He just looked tired, defeated. Emma made a decision. "I met with Sophie Valdez this morning," she said. All three men turned to stare at her. "You what?" Carl's voice was dangerous. "The journalist from the Kansas City Star." "I met with her, off the record." Emma met her father's eyes. "She's been investigating Heartland Futures for 2 years. She has sources, former employees willing to talk. She knows about other properties where they dumped, other people they threatened." "Emma, what did you tell her?" Morrison's voice was carefully controlled. "Nothing. I listened. But she wants our story. She wants to publish everything, the tape, the documents, the contamination, make it public before Gaines can bury it in court." "Absolutely not." Carl moved toward her. "We're not talking to the press. We're doing this the right way." "The right way got Grandpa killed." Emma's voice cracked. "The right way failed him 15 years ago. The right way just let a key witness die in a convenient accident." "When does the right way actually work?" "Emma, he said it himself, Dad, on the tape. He said he'd go to the newspapers if he had to. He knew the system couldn't be trusted. And he died before he got the chance." Carl's voice echoed off the barn walls. "He died because he went after people more powerful than him. And you want to do the same thing?" "I want to finish what he started." They stared at each other. Emma saw fear in her father's eyes. Not anger. Fear. "If we go public," Morrison said quietly, "there's no taking it back. No controlling the narrative. And Emma, your family becomes a target. If Gaines or Hoskins or anyone else at Heartland Futures feels cornered, feels like they have nothing to lose." They already feel cornered, Emma interrupted. That's why Collar's dead. They're already eliminating threats. How long before they decide we're threats too? Morrison didn't answer. Pete, who'd been silent through all of this, finally spoke. She's right. They're coming for us anyway, at least if it's public, if people are watching. Maybe that's protection. Carl turned to his brother. You can't be serious. I am serious. Morrison's doing his best, but the system's rigged. We all know it. Gaines has money, lawyers, connections. We've got dead family and poisoned land. The only weapon we have is the truth. And the only way to use it is to tell everyone. Carl's hands were shaking. Emma watched him struggle with it, watched him look at Morrison, at Pete, at her. I need to talk to Mom, he said finally. If we're doing this, she gets a say. It's her husband, her decision too. They gathered in Dorothy's kitchen that evening. The five of them, Dorothy, Carl, Pete, Emma, and Morrison. Emma laid out everything Valdez had said, the pattern of illegal dumping, the other victims, the federal investigation possibility. Dorothy listened without interrupting. When Emma finished, the room went quiet. Walter would have gone to the newspapers, Dorothy said finally. Her voice was steady, clear. He said so on the tape. He knew the system was compromised, knew he couldn't trust it. She looked at Morrison. No offense, Sheriff. None taken, ma'am. But he also knew, Dorothy's voice caught. He knew it was dangerous, knew he might pay for it, and he did. He paid with his life. Mom, Carl started. Dorothy held up her hand. Let me finish. She looked around the table, at her sons, her granddaughter. Walter died trying to protect this land, our home, and for 15 years I've watched the people who killed him live free. Watched them prosper. Watched them continue poisoning other families, other farms. Her voice got harder. I'm 70 years old. I don't have another 15 years to wait for justice. If going public is what it takes, if putting our names on that story is what stops them, then we do it. It's dangerous, Morrison said. I need you all to understand that. Living is dangerous. Dorothy's eyes were fierce. Staying silent while murderers walk free is dangerous, at least this way. We're fighting back. Carl looked at his mother, at Pete, at Emma. Emma could see him searching for a reason to say no, searching for a safer path. He didn't find one. Okay, he said quietly. We talk to Valdez. We give her everything. We tell the story. Emma pulled out her phone. Sophie Valdez arrived the next morning with a photographer and a recording device. They set up in Dorothy's living room, the same room where Mitchell Gaines had sat after Walt disappeared, drinking coffee and expressing his sympathies. Emma watched her grandmother's face as Valdez placed the recorder on the coffee table. Dorothy's expression was carved from stone. Before we begin, Valdez said, I need your consent to publish everything. The tape, the documents, your interviews. Once this story runs, there's no taking it back. We understand, Dorothy said. Start recording. Valdez pressed the button. Mrs. Drummond, tell me about the last time you saw your husband. Dorothy's voice didn't waver. She described that morning in detail. The kiss goodbye, Walt climbing onto the Farmall, driving toward the back 40. She described the search, the official response, the years of silence. When Valdez played Walt's tape, Dorothy closed her eyes but didn't look away from the truth in his words. Carl spoke next, talked about finding the tractor, about the evidence hidden inside, about Ray Hoskins' threats at the fence line. His voice cracked when he described listening to his father's voice for the first time in 15 years. Pete detailed the contamination, the drums, the scope of environmental damage. Emma explained the discovery, the investigation, the lawsuit Gaines had filed to bury everything. The interview lasted 3 hours. When it ended, Valdez sat back and looked at them. This runs tomorrow, she said. Front page, and I'm sending copies to the EPA, the State Attorney General, and every major news outlet in the region. By tomorrow afternoon, everyone will know what Heartland Futures did, what Mitchell Gaines did. Good, Dorothy said simply. The article hit the Kansas City Star's website at 6 a.m. By 7, Emma's phone was ringing. Local news stations, reporters from Wichita and Topeka, even a producer from a national network. She ignored them all. The print edition arrived at 8. Emma stood in Dorothy's driveway, reading the headline, "Murdered for the Truth, Family Exposes, Decades of Illegal Dumping." That cost farmer. His life below it, Walt's face stared out from a photo taken in 1995. Smiling. Alive? Next to it, a photo of the rusted Farmall being lifted from the pond. The story was devastating. Valdez had woven together Walt's tape, the family interviews, her own investigation into Heartland Future's history. She'd found 2 former employees willing to go on record. Both described systematic illegal dumping operations managed directly by Mitchell Gaines. She'd documented 9 other contamination sites across Kansas. She'd included the threatening letter Gaines had sent Walt, and she'd ended with a question. If Heartland Futures is willing to murder to keep their crimes hidden, how many other families are still waiting for answers? Morrison called at 9. "You've started a firestorm. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. State Police, EPA, Attorney General's office. And the media? Jesus. Emma, there's news vans setting up outside the station." "Is that bad?" "It's pressure. The kind Gaines can't lawyer his way out of." Morrison's voice held grim satisfaction. "He's going to have to respond. And whatever he says, we'll be ready." At 10:30, Heartland Futures issued a statement. Emma read it on her phone, standing in the kitchen while her father made coffee nobody would drink. The allegations made by the Drummond family and the Kansas City Star are false and defamatory. Heartland Futures operates in full compliance with all environmental regulations. We are pursuing all legal remedies against those who have made these baseless accusations. Mitchell Gaines categorically denies any involvement in Walter Drummond's death. "Categorically denies," Pete read over her shoulder. "That's lawyer speak for we're panicking." Carl's phone rang. He looked at the screen, frowned. "It's Morrison," he answered, listened. His expression changed, eyes widening, jaw going slack. "When?" A pause. "Where is he now?" Another pause. "We'll be right there." He lowered the phone slowly. "Dad?" Emma's voice was tight. "Ray Hoskins just walked into the sheriff's station." Carl's voice was strange, shaky. "He wants to make a deal. He's ready to talk about who killed Grandpa." They arrived at the sheriff's station to find it surrounded by news crews. Morrison had to escort them through the back entrance, past reporters shouting questions Emma couldn't process. Inside, Morrison led them to a conference room. "Hoskins is with his lawyer in interview room 2. He's asking for immunity in exchange for testimony against Gaines." "Can you give him that?" Pete asked. "That's up to the county attorney, but if his testimony puts Gaines away for murder, yeah, probably. The question is whether we believe him." "Let us listen," Dorothy said. It wasn't a request. Morrison hesitated, then nodded. Led them to an observation room. Through one-way glass, Emma could see Ray Hoskins sitting at a table. He looked smaller than he had at the fence line, older. His hands were shaking. Morrison entered the interview room, sat down across from Hoskins, pressed record on a video camera mounted in the corner. "Mr. Hoskins, you've requested to make a statement. Your attorney has advised you of your rights?" "Yes," Hoskins's voice was hoarse. "I want immunity, full immunity for my testimony." "That's not my decision." "But tell me what you know, and I'll take it to the county attorney." Hoskins looked at his lawyer. The lawyer nodded. "I was driving for Heartland Futures in '96. Night runs. Gaines hired me to haul drums out to the Drummond property and dump them. Said the old man wouldn't notice, said that section was too remote." He swallowed. "But Drummond did notice. Started documenting us, taking photos." "How did you know this?" "Gaines told me. Said Drummond had confronted him, threatened to go to the EPA. Gaines was furious, said Drummond would ruin everything, cost the company millions." Emma watched Morrison lean forward. "What happened on September 14th, 1996? Hoskins closed his eyes. Gaines called me that morning, said he had a problem that needed handling, said Drummond was going to check the back 40 that day, and we needed to... His voice broke. He said we needed to make sure Drummond didn't make it back. The room was silent. Did you kill Walter Drummond? Morrison's voice was flat. No, I refused. Told Gaines I wasn't killing anybody. Hoskins opened his eyes. But I knew where Drummond would be. I told Gaines that. Told him Drummond always checked the pond around 10 on Saturdays. And then He stopped. I left. Didn't want to know what happened next. But you knew someone was going to kill him. I suspected? Yeah. Hoskins looked down at his hands. Couple days later, Gaines paid me $5,000 cash, said it was a bonus for keeping my mouth shut, said if I ever talked, I'd end up like Drummond. Who actually killed Walter Drummond? Gaines. No hesitation. He did it himself. Told me later he had to, said he couldn't trust anyone else not to talk. Said Drummond was at the pond when Gaines came up behind him, hit him with a tire iron, then pushed the tractor and the body into the water. Through the glass, Emma saw her father's hands clench into fists, saw her grandmother go perfectly still. Morrison's voice was cold. And you kept this secret for 15 years. I was scared. Gaines made it clear what would happen if I talked, and after a while it was easier to pretend I didn't know, that I hadn't been part of it. Hoskins looked up. But that article this morning, seeing Drummond's face, reading what his family went through, I couldn't anymore. I have kids, grandkids. I don't want them thinking their grandfather was part of a murder and just walked away. Why should we believe you? You've lied for 15 years. Because I kept evidence. Hoskins reached into his pocket. His lawyer handed Morrison a plastic bag. The money Gaines paid me. $5,100 bills. I never spent it, kept it as insurance, and if you check the bill's serial numbers, you'll find they came from Heartland Futures petty cash. Gaines signed them out the day after Drummond died. Morrison took the bag, looked at it, looked at Hoskins. I'll talk to the county attorney. But Mr. Hoskins, this doesn't make you clean. You're still an accomplice. The best you're getting is reduced charges. I know, but at least I can sleep at night. Morrison stood. Wait here. He left the interview room, came into the observation room where the Drummonds waited. Nobody spoke. Dorothy's face was wet with tears. Carl looked like he might be sick. Pete just stared through the glass at Hoskins. We have him, Morrison said quietly. We have Gaines. Serial numbers on the cash, Hoskins's testimony, combined with everything else, this is enough for an arrest warrant. When? Carl's voice was raw. Today. As soon as I can get a judge to sign it. Morrison looked at Dorothy. Ma'am, we're going to get justice for your husband. I promise you that. Dorothy nodded. Couldn't speak. Emma watched Hoskins through the glass, watched him sit there, hands shaking, waiting. A man who'd kept silent while her family grieved, who'd been paid to look the other way while her grandfather was murdered. She didn't feel sorry for him. She just felt tired. Mitchell Gaines was arrested at his home in Salina at 4 p.m. Emma watched it on the news, footage of officers leading him out in handcuffs, his face red with rage, shouting about lawsuits and false accusations. His lawyer materialized immediately, a man in an expensive suit who told the cameras this was a witch hunt, that his client was innocent, that they'd be filing for dismissal. None of it mattered. The charges were filed. First-degree murder, conspiracy, witness tampering, environmental crimes. The bail hearing was set for the following morning. That evening, Morrison came to the farmhouse with the county attorney, a woman named Patricia Reeves. She spread files across Dorothy's kitchen table. Mr. Gaines is claiming he's innocent, Reeves said. His lawyer's already arguing that Hoskins is lying to save himself, that the cash evidence is circumstantial, that there's no physical evidence linking Gaines to the crime scene. But you have enough to prosecute? Carl asked. We have enough to try. Whether we can convict? Reeves looked at each of them. That depends on the jury. On whether they believe Hoskins. on whether Gaines's lawyers can create reasonable doubt. "What about the tape?" Emma asked. "Grandpa's testimony? It's powerful. But defense will argue it doesn't prove who killed him, just that someone did. They'll try to pin it on Hoskins, say he was the one who murdered Walt, that he's now blaming Gaines to get a lighter sentence." Dorothy set down her coffee cup hard enough that it cracked against the saucer. "So after everything, Gaines might walk free." "I won't let that happen," Reeves said firmly. "But I need you to understand, this trial won't be easy. Gaines's lawyers will attack Walt's credibility, attack this family, attack every piece of evidence we have. You'll all have to testify, you'll be cross-examined, they'll make it as painful as possible." "We can handle it," Pete said. "Can you?" Reeves looked at him. "Can you sit in that courtroom and listen while they suggest your father was paranoid? That he fabricated evidence? That he drove his tractor into that pond himself?" Carl stood up abruptly, walked to the window. Emma could see his reflection in the dark glass, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid. "They're going to say Dad killed himself?" His voice was dangerous. "They're going to say whatever creates doubt. That's their job." Reeves gathered her files. "I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to prepare you. This will get worse before it gets better." The bail hearing was standing room only. Emma sat between her father and grandmother in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table. Gaines sat with his lawyers on the other side, 3 of them, all in suits that probably cost more than a year of farm income. He looked different without the handcuffs, confident, almost bored, like this was an inconvenience, not a murder charge. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Emma felt her grandmother's hand find hers and squeeze. Reeves argued that Gaines was a flight risk, that he had resources and motive to flee, that he'd killed once to protect his secrets and might do so again. She cited the threatening letter, Hoskins's testimony, the pattern of witness intimidation. Gaines's lead attorney, a man named Thornton, argued that his client was a pillar of the community, a businessman with deep ties to Kansas, no prior criminal record. The charges were based on the word of a convicted felon seeking leniency. Setting bail would ensure Mr. Gaines appeared for trial while allowing him to maintain his business and family obligations. The judge listened, reviewed documents, finally looked up. "Bail is set at $2 million. Mr. Gaines will surrender his passport and remain in Kansas pending trial. He is prohibited from contacting any witnesses or members of the Drummond family. Ankle monitor will be required." The gavel came down. Gaines posted bail within an hour. Emma stood outside the courthouse with her family, watching as Gaines walked out the front doors, a free man. He saw them, made eye contact, smiled. Carl lunged forward. Pete caught him, held him back. "Not here," Pete said urgently. "Not now. He wants you to lose control. Don't give him that." Gaines climbed into a black SUV, drove away. Dorothy turned to Morrison. "How long until trial?" 3 to 6 months, maybe longer if there are delays." 6 months. Dorothy's voice was hollow. 6 months while he lives his life. While we wait. Morrison didn't have an answer for that. The next weeks were a blur. Pre-trial motions. Discovery. Reeves preparing them for testimony. Meanwhile, the story kept growing. National news picked it up. Environmental groups organized protests outside Heartland Future's headquarters. The EPA announced a full investigation into the company's operations across 6 states. Emma tried to keep working the farm, but it was hard. Half the back 40 was still cordoned off as a contamination site. The soil remediation would take years and cost more than the land was worth. The bank was making noises about the mortgage. One afternoon in late August, Emma found her father sitting in the barn, just sitting on a hay bale, staring at nothing. "Dad?" He looked up. His eyes were red. "I'm going to lose the farm," he said quietly. "The contamination, the bank won't extend the loan. They're calling it a liability. I've got 90 days to pay off the mortgage, or they foreclose." Emma sat down beside him. "How much?" $340,000, he laughed, no humor in it. "Might as well be $3 million. I don't have it. Pete doesn't have it. And even if we did, what's the point? The land's poisoned. Can't grow on it. Can't sell it. It's worthless." It's not worthless. It's home. Home. Carl looked around the barn. Dad built this barn with his father. Drummond land for 4 generations, and I'm going to be the one who loses it. Because I didn't protect him. Because I told him he was paranoid. Because I... His voice broke. Emma put her arm around her father's shoulders, felt him shake with silent sobs. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "It is. All of it. If I'd listened, if I'd believed him, then you might be dead too. Gaines would have killed you both." Emma pulled back, made him look at her. "Grandpa didn't tell you because he was protecting you." "You know that." Carl wiped his eyes. "Doesn't make it easier." "I know." They sat there in silence. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on brown fields, dead grass, everything dying in the drought that wouldn't break. Finally, Emma said, "We could talk to Valdez. Maybe do another story, fundraising for the cleanup. People donated after the first article." "I'm not asking for charity." "It's not charity. It is." Carl stood up. "This is our problem. Our land. We handle it ourselves or we lose it. That's how it works." He walked out of the barn before Emma could argue. The trial date was set for October 15th. As summer bled into fall, Emma watched her family fracture under the weight of waiting. Carl withdrew, spending long hours in the fields that wouldn't grow anything. Pete threw himself into preparing testimony, reading legal documents until his eyes burned. Dorothy became smaller somehow, quieter, like she was fading. Emma tried to hold them together. Failed. In late September, the bank sent foreclosure notice. 90 days had become 60, then 30. Carl didn't fight it, just signed the papers with shaking hands. "We'll be out by Christmas," he told Emma. His voice was dead. "After the trial. After we get justice for Dad. Then we lose everything he died protecting." Emma wanted to scream, wanted to rage. But what good would it do? The land was poisoned, the bank was unforgiving, and Mitchell Gaines sat in his home in Salina, ankle monitor on, living his life while they lost everything. On October 10th, 5 days before trial, Emma got a call from Sophie Valdez. "I need you to see something," Valdez said. "Can you meet me?" Emma drove to the same diner, found Valdez with her laptop open, expression grim. "What is it?" Valdez turned the screen. Security footage, black and white. A parking garage. "This is from the night Deputy Kohler died, 3 hours before his accident." Valdez pressed play. Emma watched Kohler walk to his car, watched someone approach from behind, watched Kohler turn, recognize whoever it was, start to back away. The person grabbed him. A brief struggle. Then Kohler went limp. The person dragged him to his car, put him in the driver's seat. "Jesus!" Emma breathed. Valdez froze the frame, zoomed in on the attacker's face. Ray Hoskins. Hoskins killed Kohler? Emma's mind was racing. But Hoskins testified against Gaines. He made a deal. "Exactly." Valdez's voice was tight. "Think about it. Kohler was the only person who could testify that Gaines paid him off to close Walt's case. With Kohler dead, that thread disappears. Hoskins eliminates a witness, then turns on Gaines, gets immunity for his testimony, while Kohler can't contradict anything he says. So Hoskins is lying." Emma felt sick. "His whole testimony is a lie." "Not all of it." "I think Gaines did kill your grandfather, but I think Hoskins was there. I think he helped. And I think he's trying to put it all on Gaines to save himself." Valdez leaned forward. "This footage just came to me from an anonymous source. Someone wants this out there, wants Hoskins's credibility destroyed." "Gaines," Emma said. "Gaines sent you this." "Probably. But that doesn't make it fake. I had it authenticated. It's real." Emma stared at the frozen image of Hoskins. "If Reeves knows about this, her whole case falls apart. Hoskins is her star witness. If the jury sees this, if they know he murdered Kohler, they won't believe anything he says." Valdez closed the laptop. "Trial starts in 5 days. What do you want me to do with this?" Emma thought about justice, about truth, about her grandfather's voice on that tape, tired and scared and trying to do the right thing. "Give it to Reeves," she said. "Let her decide." Patricia Reeves looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. She sat across from the Drummond family in her office, the security footage playing on her laptop screen for the third time. "Hoskins murdered Collar." Her voice was flat. "Our star witness is a murderer, and Gaines's lawyers will have this footage by tomorrow morning if they don't already." "Can you still prosecute?" Dorothy asked. "Yes, but our case just got exponentially harder." Reeves paused the video. "Everything Hoskins testified to is now suspect. The jury will assume he's lying to save himself, which he probably is. Without his testimony, we're left with circumstantial evidence. The threatening letter, Walt's tape, the pattern of dumping. It's not nothing, but it's not enough for first-degree murder." Carl's jaw was clenched. "So Gaines walks." "I didn't say that. But we need to adjust strategy. Focus on what we can prove without Hoskins." Reeves looked at Emma. "Your grandfather's tape is still powerful. His documentation of the dumping, the contamination. That proves corporate malfeasance. And we have the forensic evidence from the tractor, the positioning of Walt's body. We can prove he was murdered. What we can't definitively prove anymore is that Gaines was the one who killed him." "But you said Hoskins testified that Gaines told him." "Hoskins is compromised. The defense will tear him apart on cross-examination. They'll show this video. They'll argue he killed both Walt and Kohler, that he's fabricating Gaines's involvement to secure his immunity deal." Reeves closed the laptop. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you want to hear." Emma watched her grandmother. Dorothy sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, but something in her eyes had gone cold and hard. "What if we had another witness?" Dorothy said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Mom?" Carl's voice was careful. "Someone who saw something that night? Someone who could place Gaines at the scene?" Dorothy met Reeves's eyes. "Would that change things? Do you have another witness?" Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. "Possibly. I need to make a phone call first." Dorothy wouldn't tell them who she was calling, just took her phone into the next room, spoke in low tones for 20 minutes. When she returned, her face was unreadable. "I've arranged a meeting," she said. "Tonight, at the farm. There's someone who needs to talk to the sheriff." "Who?" Pete asked. "You'll see." Morrison agreed to come. So did Reeves. They gathered at Dorothy's house as the sun set, painting the dead fields in shades of amber and rust. At 7:30, headlights turned into the driveway, an old pickup truck decades past its prime. The engine cut off. The door opened. A woman climbed out. Late 60s, gray hair pulled back, weathered hands. She looked nervous. When she saw Morrison, she almost turned around and left. Dorothy met her at the porch steps. "Thank you for coming, Linda." Linda. Emma searched her memory. Then it clicked. Linda Gaines, Mitchell's wife. "Mrs. Gaines." Morrison stepped forward. "I'm Sheriff Morrison. You wanted to speak with me?" Linda looked at Dorothy. "I shouldn't be here. If Mitchell finds out—" "He won't." Dorothy's voice was gentle. "You have my word." Linda swallowed hard, nodded. They went inside. In the living room, Linda sat on the edge of the couch, her hands twisted in her lap. Morrison and Reeves sat across from her. The Drummonds stood near the doorway, giving her space. "Mrs. Gaines," Reeves said carefully, "whatever you tell us today stays confidential unless you choose to testify. But we need to know, do you have information about Walter Drummond's death?" Linda closed her eyes. "I was married to Mitchell for 33 years, divorced him in 2004. Should have done it sooner." Her voice was shaking. "But I was scared. Mitchell, when he's angry, when someone crosses him, he's not a good man." "What did you see?" Morrison asked. September 14th, 1996. Mitchell came home around noon. His clothes were dirty, muddy. He had blood on his shirt, just a few drops, but I saw them. He wouldn't look at me. Just went straight to the shower, stayed in there for an hour. Linda's hands were shaking now. "When he came out, he said we needed to talk." Said there'd been an accident. Said Walt Drummond had fallen, hit his head. Said he'd tried to help, but Walt was already gone. The room was silent. I asked him why he didn't call an ambulance. Why he didn't call the police right away. He said, her voice cracked. He said it was complicated. Said Walt had been making accusations, threatening the company. Said if anyone found out Mitchell had been there when Walt died, it would look bad. So he'd moved the body. Hidden it. He admitted to moving Walt's body? Reeves leaned forward. Yes. Said he'd pushed the tractor into the pond with Walt underneath. Said nobody would find it. Said we just needed to keep quiet and everything would be fine. Linda looked up, tears streaming. I believed him about the accident. For years I believed it was just a terrible accident that Mitchell panicked about. But then, after the divorce, I started thinking, started remembering details, the way he looked that day, the blood, how calm he was, and I realized, it wasn't an accident, Dorothy said softly. No. Linda wiped her eyes. He killed him. I know he did. And I kept his secret for 8 years. Lived with him, knowing what he'd done. I'm so sorry, Dorothy. I'm so sorry I didn't come forward sooner. Dorothy crossed the room, sat beside Linda, put her hand over Linda's shaking ones. You're here now, Dorothy said. That's what matters. Morrison was writing furiously. Mrs. Gaines, are you willing to testify to this in court? Linda looked terrified. If I testify, Mitchell will. He'll destroy me. His lawyers will say I'm lying because of the divorce, because I'm bitter. They'll tear me apart. They will try, Reeves said. But your testimony corroborates what we already know. You place Gaines at the scene. You establish consciousness of guilt. He knew he'd done something wrong. That's why he hid the body. Combined with Walt's documentation of the dumping, the threatening letter, the physical evidence, this gives us what we need. Will it be enough? Emma asked. Reeves looked at her. With Linda's testimony? Yes, I believe it will be. Linda was crying openly now. Dorothy held her while she sobbed. This woman who'd been married to her husband's killer, who'd carried that secret for decades. I should have come forward when it happened, Linda whispered. I should have protected you. Protected your family. Instead, You were scared, Dorothy said firmly. You did what you had to do to survive. I understand that. She pulled back, looked Linda in the eyes. But you're here now. You're telling the truth now. That takes courage. Linda nodded, couldn't speak. Morrison closed his notebook. Trial starts in 4 days. Mrs. Gaines, we'll need to meet tomorrow to prepare your testimony, and I'll need to arrange protection. If Gaines finds out you're cooperating, he'll find out the moment I take the stand, Linda said. There's no avoiding that. Then we keep you safe until then, and after. Morrison looked at Reeves. This changes everything. Yes, Reeves said. It does. The trial began on schedule. October 15th. Clear skies, unseasonably warm. Emma sat in the courtroom wearing the only nice dress she owned, feeling like her chest was wrapped in barbed wire. The jury was sworn in. 12 people who would decide if Mitchell Gaines spent the rest of his life in prison or walked free. Reeves gave her opening statement, laid out the case methodically. The illegal dumping, Walt's discovery, the threats, the murder. She talked about the evidence they'd found, the testimony they'd hear. She looked each juror in the eye and said, the defense will try to create doubt. They'll attack our witnesses. They'll suggest alternative explanations. But at the end of this trial, the evidence will show you one simple truth. Mitchell Gaines murdered Walter Drummond to protect his criminal enterprise, and he almost got away with it. Thornton, Gaines's lawyer, stood for his opening. Painted a different picture. A tragic accident blown out of proportion. A grieving family desperate for someone to blame. A businessman being railroaded by circumstantial evidence and unreliable witnesses. Ray Hoskins is a convicted murderer, Thornton said. He killed Deputy Caller. You'll see the video, and he's trying to save himself by blaming my client. Linda Gaines is a bitter ex-wife with an axe to grind. And the Drummond family, he gestured toward them. They want justice for their loss. We all understand that, but wanting justice doesn't make Mitchell Gaines guilty. The first week was forensics. The coroner testified about Walt's injuries, the skull fracture, the angle of the blow. A biomechanics expert testified that the injury pattern was consistent with murder, not accident. The forensic team walked the jury through the tractor evidence, the hidden documents, the contamination found at the site. Gaines sat through it all looking bored, taking notes, whispering to his lawyers. Emma wanted to scream. The second week, Hoskins testified. He was already serving time for Collar's murder, part of the deal Reeves had negotiated. He walked through his version of events, said Gaines had hired him to dump waste, said Gaines had told him about killing Walt. Thornton destroyed him on cross-examination, showed the security footage of Hoskins murdering Collar, asked him how many deals he'd made with prosecutors, suggested every word out of his mouth was calculated to reduce his sentence. By the time Hoskins left the stand, Emma could see the doubt in several jurors' faces. Then Linda Gaines testified. She wore a simple blue dress, no makeup. Her voice shook, but she didn't waver. She described what Mitchell had told her that day, the blood on his shirt, his admission that he'd hidden Walt's body. Thornton tried to rattle her, brought up the divorce, the settlement, suggested financial motive for her testimony. Linda just looked at him. "I'm not here for money," she said quietly. "I'm here because I've lived with this secret for 28 years, because I looked Dorothy Drummond in the eye at her husband's memorial service and said nothing, because I'm tired of being afraid of what my ex-husband might do to me. He's a murderer, and I won't protect him anymore." The courtroom was silent. Emma looked at the jury, saw belief in their faces, saw them looking at Gaines with new eyes. For the first time, Emma thought, we might actually win this. Dorothy Drummond took the stand on the trial's final day. Emma watched her grandmother walk to the witness box with perfect posture, head high. 70 years old, but she moved like she was made of steel. Reeves led her through the testimony gently. The morning Walt disappeared. The search, the 15 years of not knowing. Finding the tractor, hearing Walt's voice on the tape for the first time since he'd vanished. "Mrs. Drummond," Reeves said, "did your husband ever express fear for his safety in the weeks before he disappeared?" "Not directly. Walter wasn't a man who scared easily, but he was worried, careful. He started locking gates he'd never locked before, started checking over his shoulder." Dorothy's voice was steady. "He knew something was wrong. He just didn't tell me how wrong until it was too late." "Why do you think he kept it from you?" "Because he loved me. Because he thought he could handle it himself. Because—" her voice caught. "Because he didn't want me to be in danger too." Emma saw two jurors wipe their eyes. When Thornton stood for cross-examination, he tried to be respectful. Even he knew attacking a widow wouldn't play well. But he probed anyway, asked if Walt had enemies, if he'd been depressed, if there was any evidence beyond circumstantial that pointed to Mitchell Gaines specifically. Dorothy looked at him. "Mr. Thornton, I was married to Walter for 40 years. I knew that man better than I know myself, and I can tell you with absolute certainty my husband did not have an accident. He did not kill himself. Someone murdered him and buried him like trash. And that someone is sitting right there." She pointed at Gaines. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Thornton objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Dorothy Drummond point at Mitchell Gaines and call him a murderer. After Dorothy stepped down, Carl testified, then Pete, then Emma, all of them describing the discovery, the evidence, the pattern of intimidation. By the time Emma left the stand, her hands were shaking and her throat was raw, but it was done. Closing arguments came next. Reeves wove everything together, the dumping, the threats, Walt's murder, Linda's testimony, the physical evidence. She ended by holding up a photo of Walt on his Farmall, smiling. Walter Drummond was a good man who tried to do the right thing, and it cost him everything, his life, his family's peace, 15 years of justice denied. But today, you have the power to make it right. You have the power to say that truth matters. That murder has consequences. That powerful men can't kill to protect their profits. She looked at each juror, Find Mitchell Gaines guilty. Give the Drummond family the justice they've waited 15 years to receive. Thornton's closing focused on reasonable doubt, on unreliable witnesses, on the lack of physical evidence directly tying Gaines to the killing. He was eloquent, convincing. Emma left the courtroom that day not knowing which way it would go. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Emma was feeding the horses when her father's truck came tearing up the driveway. She dropped the feed bucket and ran. Carl was out of the truck before it fully stopped. They've reached a verdict. We need to go. Now. The drive to the courthouse was silent, except for Dorothy's whispered prayers in the back seat. Emma's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. The courtroom was packed. News cameras outside, reporters everywhere. Morrison saved them seats in the front row. Emma sat between her father and grandmother, their hands linked together. The jury filed in. Emma tried to read their faces. Couldn't. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" Emma stopped breathing. "We find the defendant, Mitchell Gaines, guilty." The courtroom exploded. Emma heard her father make a sound, half sob, half gasp. Felt her grandmother's hand squeeze hers so hard it hurt. Pete was crying openly. Emma just sat there, stunned, as the judge read through the rest of the charges. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Mitchell Gaines sat frozen. His face had gone white. His lawyers were already talking about appeals, about errors, about injustice. But none of it mattered. He'd been found guilty of murdering Walter Drummond. The judge set sentencing for 30 days out, revoked Gaines's bail. Emma watched as officers led him away in handcuffs. This time, he didn't look confident. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd killed to protect his secrets and finally been caught. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, microphones and cameras, and shouted questions. Morrison's deputies cleared a path, but before they reached the truck, Dorothy stopped, turned to face the cameras. "My husband died trying to do the right thing," she said. Her voice was clear, strong. "For 15 years, the man who killed him lived free. Sat at my table, looked my family in the eye, and lied. Today, justice finally came. Not just for Walter, for every family that's been poisoned by corporate greed, for every person who tried to speak truth and was silenced." She looked directly into the nearest camera. "To anyone out there fighting powerful interests, don't give up. The truth matters, and eventually the truth wins." Sentencing came 4 weeks later. The judge gave Gaines life without parole. He'd be 70 when he entered prison. He'd die there. Emma watched him led away one final time. Felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief, just exhaustion. Outside, Reeves found them. The EPA finished their investigation. Heartland Futures is being shut down. Corporate officers are facing federal charges. And there's a victims' compensation fund being established for your family and the 8 other properties they contaminated. "How much?" Carl asked. "Enough to pay off your mortgage. Start the cleanup. Maybe replant in a few years once the land's safe." Reeves smiled slightly. "It's not everything you lost, but it's something." Carl just nodded. He'd gone quiet since the verdict, hadn't said much at all. That evening they gathered at Dorothy's house, all of them, Dorothy, Carl, Pete, Emma. They sat on the porch as the sun set, not talking, just being together. Finally, Dorothy spoke. "Walter would be proud of you, all of you. You finished what he started." "Doesn't feel like we finished anything," Carl said quietly. "Dad's still gone. The farm's still poisoned. We still lost 15 years. "We did," Dorothy agreed, "but we didn't lose everything. We have each other. We have the truth, and we have his memory, not as a man who disappeared, but as a man who stood up for what was right." She looked at her sons. "That matters." Pete wiped his eyes. "I wish he was here." "So do I." Dorothy's voice broke. "Every single day." Emma looked out at the fields. The drought had finally broken. Rain last week, gentle and steady. The grass was still brown, but underneath you could see hints of green. Life returning, slowly, but returning. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "We rebuild," Dorothy said. "We clean up the land. We keep farming on the sections that are safe. We honor Walter by living the way he would have wanted, honestly, bravely, without fear of powerful men." She smiled slightly. "And we make damn sure everyone remembers his story, so it doesn't happen to anyone else." Carl reached over, took his mother's hand. "Okay," he said, "we rebuild." 6 months later, Emma stood at the edge of the remediated section of land. The EPA had finished the cleanup on 5 acres, expensive, intensive, but thorough. The soil tested clean, safe enough to plant. Her father was already out there with the tractor, a newer model, but painted the same International Harvester red, working the field like his father had, like his grandfather had. Dorothy walked up beside Emma. She moved slower now. The trial had taken something out of her, but her eyes were still sharp. "He looks like Walter," Dorothy said softly. "Same stubborn way of gripping the wheel." "I wish I remembered Grandpa better," Emma said. "I was so young." "You know him where it matters." Dorothy tapped Emma's chest. "You have his courage, his sense of right and wrong, his unwillingness to back down when it matters." She smiled. "That's why you called the reporter. Why you pushed us to go public. You're more like Walter than you know." Emma watched her father make another pass across the field. Behind him, the turned earth was dark and rich, ready for planting. "What are we planting?" Emma asked. "Winter wheat." "Same as Walter always planted." Dorothy's voice was steady. "It'll be ready to harvest next summer. First crop on this land in nearly 3 years. And the contaminated sections? The EPA says another 2 years, maybe 3, but they'll be clean eventually. All of it will be clean." She looked at Emma. "We just have to be patient. Keep working. Trust that doing the right thing matters." Emma nodded, felt something loosen in her chest. Not peace, exactly. Not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophie Valdez. "Documentary crew wants to interview your family. National network. Interested?" Emma showed it to her grandmother. Dorothy read it. "What do you think?" "I think Grandpa would want his story told. Want other people to know they can fight back against corporations like Heartland Futures." Emma looked at the field. "I think we should do it." "Then we'll do it." Dorothy squeezed her hand. "Together?" The tractor made another pass. The sun sank lower. And somewhere in the turned earth, in the clean soil ready for planting, Walter Drummond's legacy took root. Not in his death, in what came after.